Hello and welcome into the Fog.net podcast. My name is Michael Swain, the Kansas beat writer for 24/7 Sports, and we're coming to you on another Sunday. We're talking about Kansas football, joined by Kevin Flaherty. We got a lot to break down. Kevin, I feel like we've seen this movie before, and we may as well just go and play like a highlight montage of like the last five podcast episodes and like clip that together. And that might just be able to serve as a podcast for today because I feel like we're going to talk about some of the same things we've been talking about, over the last couple weeks. KU, another game that I think follows a similar script to other losses. There are good moments for KU in this game. There's a time before the half where you feel like KU maybe has a chance to try and push the ball. They don't. We get a little conservative, and it doesn't go well. Then the second half, KU scores, takes the lead, comes down to the defense needing to get a stop. They can't, and KU falls to 1-5 on the season. Kevin, I will say, as someone that was there, I think this Arizona State trip is going to become one of the more popular ones, I think, on the Big 12 schedule for KU. Cool stadium, obviously, really cool city, if you want to include it as like a Phoenix area. But obviously for KU, this game doesn't go quite as planned for the Jayhawks. Another week where, Kevin, I don't know where to start. I feel like there's so many things we can get into, so you can have at it. And we can go from
Well, this wasn't necessarily like the story of the game or how it was decided, but I think it's important for context. You wanted to get some hiking done and stuff while you were out
yes.
there, and we're not able to do it because the heat was too high.
Yeah. I was with a couple of friends, and we were gonna try and go hike Camelback on Saturday morning, and we were going at like 9 a.m. And it was about probably already 95, and in the sun, it's pretty hot. And we get there, and they're like, "Yeah, it's too hot today. The trail is closed." And that just made me chuckle to myself when I'm like, yes, so we're gonna have guys go wear, probably very expensive equipment and go run around and hit each other in this heat in about 6 hours. So that was interesting. But yeah, Kevin, it was hot. It was really hot, and I think Lance Leipold talked about it a little bit post game. When the sun went down and you're out of the sun, it's not as bad, but it doesn't matter. It was still hot and gets everyone really, the hydration was a huge key. And I think it's still one of those things that did have a pretty big impact in the game.
Yeah, I think it was pretty apparent when you combine that with some of the injuries and guys being banged up that they had on defense. I think it was a factor in terms of the ways that guys just wore down. Right, you had a lot of guys out there that either weren't used to playing or weren't used to playing that much, and certainly that's a factor in multiple ways, right? Because sometimes you can get a player on to the field defensively for 20 or 30 plays here. You feel like, generally speaking, this guy isn't going to hurt us because he's not going to be out there. All of a sudden, that guy may be out there for 70 plays, and then there are guys that aren't playing that all of a sudden are out there for 20 or 30 plays. And not that he played badly. I actually think he's going to be pretty good, Swain. I think you'd agree with me, but it was kind of interesting that final drive, seeing Jaylen Todd out there on the field at cornerback, a true freshman, a guy that isn't usually out there in those high leverage situations in particular. He's out there when the defense just has to get a stop. It wasn't Jaylen Todd's fault. I'm not saying anything like that. I actually thought he acquitted himself pretty well while he was out there. But I thought that was one of the interesting sort of side stories on it. Lance Leipold talked about it after the game, said we had guys out there on the field in key situations that didn't travel with us last time we went on the road. And that's a factor too.
It was, and I think the guy you're talking about there is Taylor Davis, who had to play a lot at safety. And I think this is a game, right, Kevin? It's another time when you can look at the defense and say positive moments, just like TCU, forcing turnovers. Those are huge plays, right, Kevin? And if the offense is able to take advantage of it, it's a little bit of a different ball game. And it's probably also why it's a team loss for Kansas, because I think you can look at kind of every single phase and say, yeah, KU just was not good enough. And if, defensively, at least, I think you saw some of just the depth show up. You know, at linebacker, I thought KU really missed Cornell Wheeler and the
Yeah.
physicality he provides. Like the thing that watching that game, Kevin, and thinking about the other games KU's played in this year, Illinois was a physical game, but KU, I felt like, won that battle.
Yeah.
UNLV, KU won that battle, even West Virginia. This was one of the games this year where I watched that for KU's defensive front seven, and I did not feel like they either won or were even in that battle. And I feel like KU just missed having that guy like Cornell in the middle who provides that athleticism, that feel for being in the right spots, being in the right gaps. And I think that really showed up. And look, I think you can point to safety as well. Obviously, Taylor Davis being a redshirt freshman, right? Your first extended playing time is on the road against Arizona State, whose running back is on fire. Like that
Yeah.
is such a hard situation to be put in that like you can't expect him to go out there and play like Kenny Logan or go out there to play like OJ had in the game, because I thought OJ played all right. It's just tough to ask them to do that right away when
Yeah.
they aren't super familiar with the level. And I think just the depth for KU, this is a game that KU needed defensive depth because they're playing and it's 100 degrees. And I think you just saw some of the limitations right now that KU has, either through injury, roster construction, just some of the deficiencies KU has right now.
Yeah, I think Cornell's a key guy for multiple reasons, right? I mean, for one thing, I think he's proven to be a pretty good communicator. That was something
Yeah.
they were worried about with Rich Miller graduating, was how are we going to replace that part of it? I thought he had done pretty well in that role, but something that he added that you and I have talked about that Rich Miller didn't necessarily have is he's a factor against the run, but
Mm.
not just run between the tackles. When
Yeah.
people run stretch, when they run wide zone, he also has the athleticism to get out to the outside and still be physical at the point of attack after making that sort of run to get out there. I think you made a really good point with the front, because I think that when you look at this team's strengths, and yes, they do have strengths despite being 1-5. One of them obviously being the running back room. I felt like the defensive tackle group has had, been one of the strongest position groups all season long. There was a really big third down late on that final drive, and Arizona State kind of rolled up KU and pushed them off the line. And I remember thinking when that happened, look, it's one play, but at the same time, on big running plays in the past, I always felt like the defensive tackles held up well.
Mhm.
They didn't get moved, and that was something where you looked at the number of plays that the Arizona State had, 70 in that heat. Defensive tackle, they rotate more than they do at other
Mhm.
positions because they legitimately have, 4 or 5 guys that can play fairly well there. Even so, when it came time on that drive, and those specific guys had been on the field for that drive for a little while, that was one of the first times this entire season that I can remember the interior of the line getting pushed off of the ball.
Yeah, I totally agree, Kevin. And that shows up in the stats too. The fourth quarter rushing totals. Arizona State ran for 300 yards.
Yeah.
Right. That's bad. And in the fourth quarter specifically, I think it was about 116 rushing yards. So you're looking at, for lack of a better way to put it, a third of the yards in the game came in the fourth quarter. And that just screams depth to me,
Yeah.
and the inability to have guys out there um, either be fresh or be in the right spots. And that is just huge. And if you can't stop the run late in the game, you're screwed, because
Yeah.
teams like, that's the thing, Kevin. Like late in the games, you're seeing it right now. Teams have 3 quarters to kind of figure things out. And in the fourth quarter, teams this year have done a really good job of just honing in on what it is that KU has struggled with. And I think at times you've just seen this defense wear down. I think early in the year, that was probably more due to the fact the offense couldn't stay on the field. I think this one, the defense, you know, you can't say had it coming, but the fact that KU's defense was unable to get off the field on several drives throughout the course of the second half and even into the fourth quarter is the reason why then on the final drive, why I think it looked so warm knife through butter that it did.
Yeah, we've talked on here before about how if Kansas is going to go to the running game, doing it over the course of a game could lead to them running the ball better in the fourth quarter because you're, for one thing, if you're talking about complementary football, you're helping your defense out because you're stretching things out, you have time of possession, all of those things. But even beyond that, you're wearing down the defense. And so those carries that you have in the fourth quarter are going against a defense that isn't fresh. And I thought one of the things that Arizona State did really well was they basically said, this is who we are. We're going to run the ball 45 times, and if we win, great. If we don't, we're still going to run the ball for 45 times.
Yeah.
And I think that once you got to that point in the fourth quarter, you could see the strategy was working. Kansas was out of gas on that side of the ball. They were either having to rotate guys in that maybe they didn't want in those situations, or the guys who were on the field were tired. And that's a tough spot to be in when you have to lock down and get that one final stop.
Yeah, exactly. And Kevin, this is a game that fits the bill of just like TCU. Where down to down, TCU's offense was better than KU's defense throughout the course of the game. And then there are just those couple plays, right, where KU is able to force that turnover. And, in this game, KU is able to get, a pair of takeaways. And obviously the inability for the offense to take advantage is one thing, but I think also KU just generally has just not been able to translate where, Kevin, early in the year, it felt like KU down to down had shown a lot of improvement and was playing really good football. And then now you look at this game and, Arizona State's success rate was 64%.
Yep.
That's the 99th percentile. That's that's about as good as you can get in college football. Basically 2/3 of the time, Arizona State got the yards it needed to get to either stay on track or be better.
Yep.
And this is just a game that comes down to, can your defense, get a stop when it matters? And KU's defense was really unable to. And just late in the game, I don't know how you felt about it, Kevin, but when they had to go out on the field, right? So in the second half, it goes for Arizona State, right? Interception, touchdown. Like, it's one of those where, you're watching it happen, and it's just like, the momentum's not with KU. And when Arizona State had, 2 minutes and 4 seconds or whatever it was, I don't know about you, but I kind of was like, oh gosh, that is a lot of time.
Yes.
For a team that has not had too many issues going against KU.
Yeah, and I think people talked about, did they score too early? And when you're when you're down, and especially with where KU has been, where they've had these chances offensively to come back and haven't been able to do it, I do think you kind of take the points if or when you can get them. But at the same time, the second they were clearing up Quentin Skinner's catch, and maybe even before that, after Skinner made the catch and during the review, people were saying, oh, there's too much time here. And I think that it's almost like when you're watching an old-fashioned like mummy movie and the mummy's going really, really slowly towards them, and they're going to catch up. And it's like the characters just sitting there, screaming, and there's still the time until they get caught, but that part is coming. And I think that was kind of what it felt like. It felt like there wasn't a lot of confidence that, hey, they're going to be able to pull out the stop here. You felt like they were gassed already, for one thing, but even beyond that, Swain, when you play defense, I feel like it's almost, especially let's say against Arizona State, it's like a 3-pronged bar stool, right? Where the run game, especially Scatterboo, is one leg. The quarterback run game with Levitt is another leg that they can hit you with. The passing game is kind of that other leg. You want to take one of the legs away so the stool falls. And
Sure,
generally speaking, you'd like to take away what they're really good at. I mean, you'd like to make them operate on their B and C rather than what they really want to do. Swain, Kansas didn't take anything away. I mean, they got a couple stops over the course of the game, but if you really look at it, when Arizona State wanted and or needed to throw the ball, they threw it effectively. When Levitt took off, he was effective with it, and obviously the primary running game with Scatterboo, it was effective as well. And so you had a tired defense that over the course of the game hadn't really taken anything away from Arizona State that they wanted to do, and that's just not a good combination.
No, it's not. And Kevin, you brought up the quarterback run game. Like that is something that every talking to Chris Cartman before the game, about Levitt, he's like, scrambler, but not necessarily someone that's like a dual threat quarterback that is a guy that's going to go run a lot. And then he goes and runs for 75 yards, which is season high, and it felt like he ran for over 100.
It did,
because of the timing and the chunk gains that he got from those plays, and KU's inability to get pressure too. This felt like a very different type of game than maybe Garrett Green had, Kevin, where Green was scrambling, getting away from pressure, and then extending plays and running. Like this was just dialed up quarterback runs and options that led to him getting a season high in rushing yards. And for KU, like, I don't know what it's going to take to figure that out with mobile quarterbacks and eliminating, not even eliminating, Kevin, like just can you stop it occasionally? That's something that has been such a challenge for KU this season. And obviously they really struggle with it again on Saturday night.
Yeah. And with a pass rush, you want to be able to get there and you want to be able to stay in lanes. And I'm not sure they did either super well once again. And I think usually on this show, we talk about the game and we talk about what it means. Kansas is obviously going into a bye week, and we'll talk more about that, I'm sure, here in a little bit. But with Chris up next for Houston, who, had a terrific running game in Houston's kind of awakening, if you will, and then getting Avery Johnson right on the back.
Oh boy.
You got to figure this thing out. And I know that we've said that before. You were talking about making a sort of a highlight montage of stuff that we've said. The quarterback run game has been an issue. The quarterback scramble game has been an issue. And hey, guess what? You're getting to face two quarterbacks who are maybe better than the previous quarterbacks that you faced at those two things. And so defensively, I don't know if that means that certain guys need to start getting more playing time where they can potentially create more pressure if they feel like one of those guys is out there. I don't know if there's something schematically that they need to do where they need to say, darn the coverage, let's have a permanent spy or somebody that needs to be there. I'm not sure what the solution is. And I think that's the tough thing about being Borland, Grimes, and Lance Leipold at this point is I think that a lot of their problems are multifaceted where there's not necessarily a super easy answer that's in glowing lights against the wall that says, hey, this is going to make everything better.
Yeah, and we could talk big picture at the end, Kevin, because I want to circle back to that point there with something Lance Leipold has been saying. But you're right. Like it is something that you look at the quarterbacks coming up on KU's schedule, and if this is not something that is like, it's already not been nipped in the bud because it's come up so many times. But if now it is not like improved upon during the bye week when KU does its self-scout, when they do the couple practices, like this is something that could be game-changing for KU to not win more games. And if you can't stop mobile quarterbacks from being mobile and limiting their ability to do that, like it's going to be a long second half of the season, Kevin. And I think that's the thing for KU. There are just a lot of things defensively you can look at and say, got to be better at linebacker. Got to
Yep.
be better against mobile quarterbacks. Can't be giving up, big plays, 3-4 times a game at corner. Your corners can't be getting stupid after the play flags. Your guys have to play sound football. And the fact that I think you can look at so much of this stuff, and it is the same things we've been talking about, right? KU's defensive backs have been giving up big plays all season. That's happened. And the consistency hasn't maybe been where some people like myself maybe thought it would be. Linebacker, if Cornell's not back, I don't know. Maybe someone like Logan Brantley getting healthy will help, but even then, he wasn't someone that was seeing the field to begin with when he was healthy. Like, there are just still a lot of things that need to be worked out, Kevin. And the fact that we're 6 weeks into the season now, and you can't say, hey, KU, fine, all right, against Illinois, Franklin had a great game and made some big plays. And hey, against West Virginia, they made some big plays. But look, against TCU and against Arizona State, they figured it out. You can't say that. The physicality, it felt like that kind of is something that started with KU being good at the start of the season. Now it's like, ooh, not the best, offensive line KU's going to play this year, and got out physical. That for me, Kevin, is the biggest concern, big picture with the defense right now, is the fact that there are more questions than answers. And it feels like there are more questions popping up each week that also do not have subsequent answers.
Yeah, and it's kind of, I'm not going to say the offense is perfect, but it's kind of divergent, or polar opposite to the way the offense has been. Because early in the year, especially Illinois and UNLV, you came out of those games feeling like those games were more on the offense. Not that the defense was perfect in those games, but you had the late drives in both of those. But at the same time, you felt like, man, the offense really needs to figure things out.
Yeah.
The offense has been getting better. And the TCU game, there were some things that they left out on the field, but overall, I think opportunities were there. The West Virginia game, you averaged 7 yards a play. This one, you averaged 6.4 yards a play. It's the best game for Jaylen Daniels so far this season. And so the offense has kind of started taking that step forward. And so in some respects, you say, well, it's same story, different day. In other respects, a few weeks ago, we were saying, man, Jeff Grimes is struggling. Jaylen Daniels not doing super well. They keep turning the ball over. Swain, they've turned the ball over once over the last 2 games combined. Jaylen Daniels graded out, fairly well against Pro Football Focus, on Pro Football Focus. The numbers weren't necessarily there, but he didn't play badly. This time the numbers maybe more accurately reflected the way that he played. Jaylen Daniels is taking a step forward. The offense is doing some good things. They score over 30 for the first time since Lindenwood. And yet, at the same time, you're still here losing games in the fourth quarter. And so it's a new and interesting way to get to the same place. And so I think that's the scary thing about the defense, is that the defense has gone the opposite route, where maybe you felt like, hey, this could potentially be a strength, even at a level beyond what we thought it would be before the season. And it's really struggled.
Yeah, it has. And so, Kevin, here's some good numbers for you. You can't use total points right now with the Big 12 because teams have played different amount of games, right? There's a good host of teams that have played 2 games. KU's played 3. One thing you can use, though, is average points. And in terms of average points a game in conference games so far, KU is averaging 28.7, which is kind of middle of the road. It's 8th in the conference. That's on offense. On defense, Kevin, KU is averaging 35 points allowed per game, and that is 3rd worst in the conference, with UCF and Baylor as the only 2 teams that have worse numbers than KU. Like, this is just it's a defensive thing right now, and I don't, we can get to offense right now, Kevin, but to wrap up the point on the defense, going into the bye week, I am much more concerned about KU's defense in the next kind of pocket of 3 games, really, if you want to factor in, Houston, Kansas State, Iowa State. I'm much more concerned about KU's defense than its offense right now.
Yeah, I think so, and I think it's an interesting deal because I think that KU's good enough to continue to be in close games. And with Jaylen starting to play better, and it seemed like I don't know. Did you get a chance to talk to him after the game, or was it just Leipold? Or
Yeah, Jaylen talked, but
it seemed like he got a little bit of his swagger back against Arizona State. I mean, just from what we were able to see, and if he's that guy, potentially you're going to put yourself in spots to also be in close games once again, but you're not going to win those games if your defense continues to give up the really bad clutch drives, and not just, we've talked about the end of the game, Swain, maybe the most damaging, certainly one of the most damaging was at the end of the first half. And we'll talk about that offensive decision, I'm sure. But you punt the ball, you have bad coverage on the punt that leads to a good punt return, and then you let somebody go 58 yards in 50 seconds. And so you can't have those defensive lapses at the end of the first half either, because if Kansas had gotten a stop there, gone into the half up 14-7 with getting the ball coming out of that, this might have been a different game.
Exactly. And how about we just start talking about that, Kevin, then?
Sure.
Because this is now a common theme for KU. I think at times KU's try to be aggressive at the end of halves, right? You think about the Illinois game. You can think about the UNLV game. And there's no doubt in my mind that those two games and the way the first half ended for KU with the offense trying to go drive time and trying to go make a play where you can do that double score, right? Where maybe you get 10 points, maybe you get 14, and you can really, really put the game out of reach and really land a really big blow in the game. That clearly, to me at least, seemed like it played a factor in KU deciding to not do that. Where KU gets the ball, I think it's 24 seconds left, and they've got 3 timeouts, and you can push the ball down the field, and KU decides to just take it into halftime. And that is the type of, I think, conservative decision there that I just think it's playing not to lose. And look, I'm sure if you want to take the other side, right, you can say it's all hindsight,
Sure.
And sure, it probably is. But I think you can even go back to KU's last offensive drive before that Arizona State score, right, where the first play, there's miscommunication with Shane Bumgarner playing right guard, and there's a free rusher going at Jaylen. And so he doesn't have time to make the read and make the throw on that play. And then KU runs the ball, and then there's a missed block from Daryl Simmons trying to climb to the second level, and that's the guy that tackles Daniel Highshaw. And then on the last play, it's just kind of a generic run up the gut, and Devin Neal gets tackled, and all of a sudden you're punting. And so it's not even like it's all on Jeff Grimes in the play call. It's a mixture of KU called some plays, and maybe they could have worked, but they didn't because the players didn't execute them. And so it's one of those two-way streets here, Kevin, where were these the best play calls known to man? Probably not. I didn't see much in the passing play, at least, that led me to believe that they were going to have guys open. But on the other hand, the offensive line needs to block. And that's what it comes down to.
Yeah. We talked about it after the West Virginia game. Everybody wants to get on the third down play call of the run on, I think, 3rd and 4, was it, against West Virginia at the end of that game. The play right before that, KU had a first down if a guy didn't miss a block. And so that was a running play. And so to some extent, like I get people's frustration, and you don't want to lose that way. I honestly, typically when that happens at the end of halves in particular, it's something the offensive coordinator runs by the head coach. He says, okay, if we've got 3rd down here, how aggressive do you want me to be? How aggressive am I allowed to be? Whatever else. And I think KU, based on the games you talked about, the Illinois game where you get the pick six, the UNLV game where you get the pick and the return, and then the coverage bust that leads to a touchdown. I
Yeah.
think they probably said, you know what, let's run this thing, punt it, go into half up 14-7. And the funny thing is, you see these decisions all the way across college football, right? Like, how many times have you watched a Georgia football game and Georgia decides, hey, we're going to be really conservative right here, and you're like, man, that's not very fun. But then Georgia's defense doesn't give up a 50-yard return or whatever it is. Georgia's defense doesn't let the other team, and so they go into half up 14-7 in that situation. And I'm not trying to compare KU to Georgia. I'm just saying it does have some logic to it that, hey, if you make this decision, the outcome should be that you should go in 14-7, and instead, because of a couple plays, because of some bad execution, you wind up going into halftime tied.
Yeah, it's also probably different for Georgia too when you just got the better team.
Oh, sure.
And you can just go run out there and just go kick some butt.
Sure.
I think you're right, though. I think generally college football coaches are very conservative, right? Do not lose the game. That's their goal. And I think sometimes they back themselves into corners. There are plenty of college coaches we could talk about that have done that, right? This is just a Lance Leipold thing. This is I think some of the mentality behind and even some of the best college football coaches, like it happens. But for KU, that was one of those moments where you see how it happens, right?
Yep.
And the thing about it too, Kevin, is that comes after. So it goes fake punt, fumble, KU 3 and out, Arizona State score, KU kneels going to halftime. It's just one of those where it's another one of those ends to the half where you're just like, oh my God, like what? Like you're looking around like, what just happened? Like, and not even like for KU, but more just like in like a football game. There's a fake punt in the first half. And then there's then the play just swings on a fumble. And then the team doesn't take it. Like, it's just one of those where it doesn't matter if it's KU or not. It's just a crazy swing in a college football game.
Yeah.
And it's another one that definitely like is not on KU's side, but there is a certain element of, I think, just playing not to lose throughout that. Is that the right decision? Is that the wrong decision? You can play revisionist history here, Kevin, because if KU goes and wins the game, you're probably still saying the same thing, but it's just a time in the game when you think take a little bit of risk. Just because it's been a close game, all of a sudden now you're in a spot where the game's tied. There's 26 seconds left. If you throw an interception deep down the field, there's probably 15 seconds left. And then it's, more or less you're just trying to get to halftime. So I don't know. That end of the first half though, Kevin, like that was a moment for me where I'm like, ooh, that felt like a chance to try and do something and just felt like an opportunity missed.
Yeah, I would agree with that. And I think, too, you look at how well Jaylen was throwing the ball at that point. I think he was, like 10 for 12 or so at that point. And so it felt like I don't know if they basically said, hey, Jaylen's playing well. Let's not put him in a position to do something negative. Let's build off of this. I think one of the interesting factors too now, Swain, is we've now seen 2 weeks in a row Kansas has really tried to get Quentin Skinner involved vertically. And so if you were looking at a chance to maybe send Skinner on a post route and say, hey, let's max protect this thing, let's send him on a post route, throw this thing and see what can happen, this might have been an instance to do it. But you look at the TCU game, they went vertical. He wasn't able to bring it in, but I mean, the pass was there. And you look at the end of this game, obviously Jaylen was able to find Quentin Skinner, over the middle of the field for a touchdown on their last possession. I think they're finding ways to stretch the field with the passing game more than they were before. And that's an encouraging thing. But it also feels like at the end of that first half, that might have been a chance to try and put that into motion as well.
Yeah, exactly. And look, I think you still point to the second half and say there are, missed opportunities, right? You
Yep.
think about the interception, right, that Devin Dye gets, and KU punts after that. Like that for me was a big swing because just generally KU's offense has not taken advantage of those opportunities when turnovers have shown up.
Yep.
Um, and that one, especially when you consider the fact that right, KU goes touchdown after that, like that was a chance. And let's be clear though, like the offense goes in and puts up over 30 points.
Yep.
This is not a game where you can go and say the offense lost the game. You know, offense, it's going to be very hard for an offense too if you have, whatever, 9 possessions. You're not going to score a touchdown every single one. Like that's just hard to do against a good team. And for KU, like the encouraging parts of this are Jaylen Daniels, I think, looked the best he's looked this year.
Yep.
And even within that, I think there's still kind of those stretches in the game, Kevin, where Jaylen, the accuracy kind of fades a little bit.
Yeah.
And it feels like there are just that those periods are now the next part that you can focus on and say, hey, if Jaylen can correct this, and maybe it goes from being a 6 or 7 throw stretch to maybe a 2 or 3 throw stretch where you lose it for a second, but then you're able to refind it. But the fact that Jaylen was able to get back and I think just look a lot better was positive. The run game for me was a bit of a concerning dynamic here where Arizona State did a very, very good job of limiting Devin Neal. And if you want to say Devin didn't get enough touches in the second half, like, sure. But also when he got those touches, he just wasn't able to do much because Arizona State, like a lot of other teams, decided in the second half that they're going to try and keep KU from being able to run the ball consistently. Because we've seen it, right, Kevin? When KU has a run game going, all of a sudden things look a lot better.
Yep.
And in the second half for KU, KU averages what, I can't remember what it was exactly, but it felt like, in the first half, especially, Devin Neal got a lot of touches right in the first quarter. It
Yeah.
was, I want to say 7 of the first 15 plays were ones where he was getting touches. And late in the first half, they did a good job stopping him. Early second half, I think they did a decent job. And then obviously later in the game when KU has success offensively, the run game's able to get going a little bit. But it's just one of those where this felt like a game where maybe Devin would have been able to get, a little bit more success. Obviously he's unable to, but that for me, the run game, what we saw versus what I was expecting didn't line up. And maybe that's on me.
Yeah, and for the second straight game, I think Arizona State was pretty on top of the speed option. It wasn't
Yeah.
really there. I did like the counters that Grimes showed to the speed option. You had the one that was kind of a speed option, and they snuck Highshaw out of the backfield and were able to hit him. Unfortunately, there Jaylen didn't plant his feet. The throw came a little low, and so he had to stop. Still ended up being a nice game. And then they've gotten pretty good at sort of that speed option end around that they run to the receivers, where they get the defense to flow one way and then get it back going the other way. But no, it's tough to march down the field and have sort of that quote unquote money drive when you're trailing. And the offense did it twice in a row. And I thought that they did a really nice job on those drives of mixing things up. I thought the creativity was maybe a little bit better than it had been in previous games. I think you're still seeing that that sort of vertical sort of fade route throw that's a 50-50 ball quite a bit in terms of how they want to push the ball downfield. And but the flip side of that is too, you were talking about Jaylen's accuracy. They mentioned it on the broadcast, and if the broadcast people are noticing it, it's pretty apparent. Jaylen's coming in pretty hot on those passes over the middle. They're coming out high. They're not being accurate. You can blame, hey, the potential, interceptions that he's had in the past. He should have been picked off, around the goal line. I mean, that was a really dangerous throw. It was, again, a linebacker undercutting his target that we've seen him throw an interception on previously this year. But I think that when you look at where they want to be in the passing game, coming through the bye week, I
Mm.
think that improving, giving him some throws that he can make confidently over the middle of the field, whether those are slant routes, whether those are digs, whatever those are, that could really help open up a lot of the other throws he's making. Because right now, defenses are just basically betting and saying, hey, you're not going to throw the ball over here. And if you are, you're not going to throw it effectively.
Yeah, exactly. And that's something that now coming out of the bye week, I really am interested to see how KU evolves his passing game. Maybe
Yeah.
that, it feels like maybe there are some things in this game where you found something that can work.
Yeah.
Are you able to translate that against Houston and Kansas State before KU has another bye week, which is so weird to think about? And that's going to be pretty critical. The passing game for KU, if they're going to, for example, beat Houston, go on the road and beat K-State, like the passing game has to be dialed in closer
Yeah.
to what it was like today with the potential of being even better. And that's what it's going to come down to. And we can transition here, Kevin, because, post game from Lance Leipold, it sounds very similar to the last few games, right? We're close. Phrases like that, are something that he said a lot. And I don't know, Kevin, like, yeah, I don't know. I've got so many thoughts here. I'm like trying to figure out like, what's the right way to go with this. You want to play body language doctor?
Yeah.
You can, right? It's not great. It's not projecting we got this,
Yeah.
and you listen to it, not a lot of answers, right, Kevin? I
Yeah.
asked him straight up about KU being outscored or allowing 38 points in the final 2 minutes of halves over the last 5 games. Just didn't answer it. Not a lot of answers. And so obviously, that's probably not going to appease fans. It's obviously harder to write about when there aren't answers from the head coach, but it's something now, Kevin, where KU's got time to find those things during the bye week. And if we go into the podcast in 2 weeks, Kevin, after Houston, and we're talking about the same things, then it's like smash the panic button, because this is the time now where there shouldn't be any sort of excuses. Like, you got to find solutions now. And that's what, like I said in the video last night, that's the $7 million question, right?
Yeah. Yeah, it is. It is. And teams take feeling from their head coach. How many times have we seen Kansas in a tight basketball game at Allen Fieldhouse? There's a minute left. Everybody in the whole place is terrified that they're going to lose to whoever they're playing, except the huddle is utterly calm because Bill Self is out there, I don't want to say joking around, but you can tell that there's a confidence there that, hey,
Yeah.
we're going to get this done. I do think the body language is part of it. I think too, Swain, the Big 12 has always had a lot of one-score games. It's just the way that the league has gone. I think too, when you look at the way that the clock works now, teams are getting fewer possessions to separate. That's
Totally.
something that you've heard from different coaches, and so I think the margins are thinner. And there's another area that Kansas really struggles in, and that's clock management. And when you're not getting as many possessions, when you're not getting as many chances, when games are tight and are going to be separated by a play here or there, the way that you manage the clock is something that I feel like means more now than maybe it did a year ago. Because, like I said, however you feel about this Kansas team, and I have a pretty good idea how a lot of people feel about this Kansas team, they're in a lot of close games. And I think it's fair to say they're probably going to be in even more close games as the schedule continues to go. The difference between them winning those games and losing those games, as Leipold would say, they're close, but you really need to hone in on, okay, why is it close but not going your way? And to some extent, these, every once in a while you can say, oh, it's an unlucky bounce. It's this, it's that, or the other. The last couple of weeks, they've arguably gotten the bounces. And I realized the TCU game didn't wind up necessarily being close at the end, but it was a 1 point game in the fourth quarter before TCU pulled that thing out. You get the turnovers there, you get some things there. Jaylen Daniels hit a linebacker right in the numbers against Arizona State. You got two of Arizona State's better defenders booted out for targeting. You had an interception for Devin Dye that hit the receiver in the hands, then got tipped up in the air and got picked off. You arguably had the bounces in those games, and you still kind of pulled a way to lose those things out. And so I think the bye week needs to be an internal look at, and don't just look at, okay, this seems like the most obvious answer, but hey, are we giving away plays with our timeout usage and the way things are going that way? If Kansas had called its timeouts earlier on that Arizona State drive, then Jaylen Daniels might not have been throwing a Hail Mary at the end of the game. He might have been throwing into the end zone, from the 20, because he would have had more time to move the ball downfield. And so little things like that can make a lot of difference. And I'm not saying it's all clock management. I'm just saying the margins are so thin that this week really needs to be a period of reflection to kind of figure out how you can get those margins to go your way as opposed to going against you like they have so far, because you're going to continue to see really thin margins this year.
Exactly, Kevin. I think that's a really great point about, I think, clock management and being able to manage those situations well.
Yeah.
I think there are a lot of coaches, that just, I think generally in the Big 12, you can look at top to bottom. There are some coaches that are really good at it. Then there are other coaches, I think about someone like Matt Campbell, who I covered, who have typically struggled in those situations.
Yep.
And you're right. Like, the clock rules have changed some things now. And that's something I plan on looking at, is some of the possession numbers, just how exactly has this changed? Points per possession is a very popular thing in basketball.
Yep.
But what does that number exactly look like for KU in football right now? And is it super different than what KU had last year? So, yeah, it's now just a question for KU of how can you get the ship straightened out. Kevin, this is the point I made on our video last night. Like, there's a big difference between 2-10 and 5-7 and 4-8.
Oh, yeah.
You can't have the bottom fall out on this season. And that's something Lance Leipold challenged the players in the locker room post game. Quentin Skinner talked about it. Leipold basically said, for the seniors, how do you want to go out? You have the chance to determine how you go out, And so this is going to be a big kind of 13 days for KU to figure this thing out, because there's half a season to go, Kevin. That's the crazy part about it. There's still half a season to go. And so there's a lot left that can be changed for KU, and it's going to come down to coaching, players, everything, right? Top to bottom.
Yep.
Can they collectively figure it out?
Yeah. Can you build some sort of program momentum? And obviously, I mean, I'm not saying they do it, but a bowl game is still on the table technically. It's still there. If you go 5-1, it's still there. And with these margins being so close, if you find a way to do that where you can get, we've talked so many times, I feel like, Swain, about the importance of getting those bowl practices, right? Because it's basically an extra spring. But let's just say you don't even do that, but you get to 4-8, you get to 5-7, 5-7 in particular. You can look at it and say, okay, we had a rough start. We rebounded. We built some momentum within the program, and you're entering that off season in a more positive place. And beyond that, Swain, you and I both know this. There's 30 seniors on this team.
Yeah.
Kansas is going to have to go out into the portal and really make some noise for this next season, because one, they're just going to need to basically replace this experience drain that they've had. But two, I think, what position are you at when you're recruiting the portal? Are you a program that can say, hey, we just missed a bowl game. If you come here, maybe we'll go back to a bowl game next year. are you looking at it where you're 3-9, you're 2-10, and you can offer playing time, but not a whole lot else to really convince somebody? You've got the new stadium, you've got some things there where if you can build any sort of positive momentum in the second half of the season, that could determine how well you do sort of in those other areas as well.
Yep, exactly. I agree. Like the finishing a season strong is going to be really important for KU now. Because I think bowl game, Kevin, that's a tough ask.
Oh, it's an incredibly tough ask.
That's going to be very hard to do. But yeah, I think, can you finish the season where it looks like, hey, the program kept battling
Yep.
and you didn't have guys check out?
Yep.
That's the biggest thing. So that's what I've got, Kevin. I mean, yeah, that's what I got.
I think that's it. Yeah, I'm right there with you, and I think that having guys not check out if they do wind up turning this thing around would be one of the best check marks that Lance Leipold could ask for in terms of, see, our culture was good, because they had every chance to check out and didn't. And so I think that would maybe serve to sort of reinforce that what they'd been building, it wasn't a 1-year thing. It wasn't a 2-year thing, that they had that part, going in the right direction, and they were able to find a way to build something back when it looked like they couldn't do it. So
yeah, exactly. Still plenty more football to play, Kevin. That's the interesting part. And look, with the way college football is, like you said, Kevin, there is no guarantee that the first half is going to be like the second half. It's going to be really interesting, kind of 2 games and then another bye week, which is just weird. And then the Final Four. So obviously we'll be podcasting along the way. Kevin, thanks as always for joining. Where can folks find all your podcast endeavors and things where they can hear you talk?
Yeah, you guys can find me over at Kansas City Sports Network, and have a KU related podcast, Pay Heed, and then also have a local recruiting podcast called Verbal Commitment. So swing by and check those out. Always appreciate the platform, Swain.
Yeah, of course. Well, thanks so much for joining us, Kevin. And thank you as always for listening. Make sure you're liking the video, subscribing to the YouTube channel if you're watching on YouTube, if you're listening on your podcast platform of choice. Please make sure you leave a rating and review as well. Those go a long way in helping us out. Thanks always for listening. We'll talk to you all probably in a few days, maybe one podcast during the bye week. Maybe we'll get Jack on, talk about some stuff. But thanks so much for listening. We'll talk to you again soon.